And welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I am Doug Keck, your host. Our guest author, Mary Rice Hasson, editor of Promise and Challenge, published by OSV, available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. It's great to see you again, Mary.
Great
I think
to
we
be
maybe saw each other at the World Meeting of Families last year. And of course, people might recognize your face. It looks familiar, a little like Dr. Rice.
My hair's longer.
A little longer,
yeah,
but you're much prettier than he was. But he was quite a handsome fellow
Yes.
there, and he was on our board for a while, and people remember him some series he did for us. Even your sister, your other sister, Teresa was here. And Dr. Rice was a great standard bearer of truth in the Catholic Church, and it's great to see that his offspring are doing the same thing. Now, this Promise and Challenge, this is an editor function for you. So where did this come from? This isn't from articles you've written or other people have written. It was some sort of conference. What was that?
Yeah, Doug, this grew out of a symposium that I organized with Helen Alvarez. When Pope Francis started talking about we've got to increase the presence of women in the church, we got together and we said, all right, well, let's make sure that we're elevating the voices of women who are authentically in support of the church's teaching. And what insights can we bring to these questions that the church is grappling with? And what would we say to Pope Francis as far as incorporating women more fully into the church? So it started with that.
Let me ask you a question, just a kind of banal question for somebody sitting out there. They say, we're reaching out to women. Now, when I go to Mass, it's mostly women. I would think it's probably fair to say the vast majority of people who watch EWTN are women. So why is there such a concern about women versus men in the church? What is the specific area we're talking about?
Well, the Pope's talking about, I don't want to say a higher level, but more of a theoretical level, a level of figuring out where do we go next. And we really do need to have more of a voice of women on that level. Because women, when you...
In the running of the church, the involvement in the church?
It's not a power thing.
Okay.
It's
yeah,
service.
But you make that point.
Yeah, and Helen Alvarez in particular makes that. So it's not power, it's about service.
Okay.
But it is about bringing insights. Just like, you're married, husbands, wives, mothers, fathers, we see things a little bit differently. So the church is grappling with some very serious things in the culture and in the world right now. And so we do need more women's insight in terms of how to do this. Because when you lose women, you lose families and you lose communities. And that's what's happened.
Right, and that's the insight that I think I got more so from this book than I expected, was the idea. You're pushing, in a sense, the complementarity idea, which was quite understandable. But the idea that if you lose the women related to the faith and the family and the unique feminine genius that's there, that's really, and we're finding it out, I think, unfortunately, the hard way, is the underpinning of a society.
Exactly.
And a loving and fair society, which is what the church wants.
Right, sure. So what's happening is women really are forming the hearts of their children. Women are teaching school. Women are running programs. So all those women that you talk about in the parish, the question is, are they well formed? Are they reaching out and bringing others in? And so are they able to speak to the culture and to those women who have left? And women are uniquely able to speak to women in a way that men and sometimes priests are not. Right. But even more so, we bring an insight that says, okay, when you're talking about contraception, let's talk about it this way. Let's lead with this. Let's draw people in a particular way. And so those are insights that women bring, different from men.
And that's kind of like what I guess Pope Francis is saying in certain cases, is the idea that we understand what the teaching is, but some of these people are going to reject that outright. So we need to have another way of approaching them, not changing the teaching, but just a way of presenting them and accompanying them to the truth.
Sure, this is not about changing the church's teaching. And in fact, I think one reason why we don't have women participating in terms of helping to shape some of the decisions is that for so many years, we're pushing women's ordination, or at least those were the only voices that were heard. And so it really derailed the conversation about how do you bring women in and women's insights to deal with the problems of the modern world.
Now
we got off track.
You've got several authors here, Helen Alvarez, Sister Sarah Butler. There's some that people will know, Teresa Farnham, your sisters, in here, and you've also got Mary Eberstadt, some names people would recognize, and Mary Ann Glendon, of course, well known to our EWTN audience, talks about in the forward about complementarity. This I thought was interesting. She cites 1 Corinthians 12 about St. Paul, and then says complementarity thus invites us to think more deeply about a broad range of relationships, including those between men and women, which we usually think about. But this was interesting, and those between clergy and laity.
Yeah, and so here's one of the things. Since Vatican II, we were supposed to have this great, groundswell of the laity, the hour of the laity, and I don't think that we've fully accomplished that. I think Pope Francis is right in pointing out there are instances where clericalization is a problem, but the answer is not to clericalize women. Mm-hmm. The answer is for women as lay women, for men as laymen, to really own that responsibility to bring our faith into the culture. And so this complementary idea, this complementarity, is the idea of collaboration. How do we do that in a way that really is collaborative? Mm-hmm. Especially since our culture has pitted men against women, right, and women against men. And so as the church, we should be modeling how do you collaborate to bring the truth to people, to shape the culture.
Right. Now, elsewhere in the introduction, she talks about John Allen, well-known journalist, Vatican's glass ceiling for women, he mentions, and this was a point she makes, progressives betray an unfortunate tendency to discount the value of certain women's mm-hmm. increased participation in the church. Women who show no quote-unquote evidence of progressive views or an inclination to challenge authority within the church structures represent little progress, according to some critics. So it does seem to be that the benchmark in many cases is this kind of, if you can become a deaconess, mm-hmm. or you're on your way to becoming a priest, or you become a bishop, that if women are in a position of powers, then they're not making progress inside the church.
Right, which is wrong-headed. Okay, first of all, it's not about quotas, it's not about power, it's a question of vocation. And the primary vocation of all of us is holiness. And we don't need a collar in order to be holy. We need to respond to what God's asked of us. But one of the things that we wanted to do with the symposium and the Catholic mm-hmm. Women's Forum, which I've put together, and in works like this book, is to really elevate the voices of women who do support the church, because they're right. out there.
Well, isn't that the vast majority mm-hmm. of people? Certainly that's the majority of people who go to Mass on Sunday, I would think.
I think it's actually 50-50
really?
In terms of people who show up at church, but perhaps not through their own fault. Mm-hmm. I think many of them have not heard the truth. But I think there are some great women who are really active and working.
What about younger women? Do you see a change in that?
I see there is so much hope in the church because we have that JP2 generation. So even moms who are at home are more well-formed. Women who have gone to grad programs are really well-formed. So the question for the church is, how do we bring the voices of those women to the foreground? How do we elevate those women mm-hmm. to be really supporting the church's teaching? And that's what we're trying to do here.
Right. And Marianne also says, this book also affirms that despite the media's fairly common portrayal of Catholic women as disaffected lot, the church has a wide reservoir of intellectually and spiritually well-formed women with hearts on fire for the Lord and the church and her authoritative teachings, which is really what you're talking about.
There's a lot of us. We're out there, and we do support that.
And actually, I should quote, that's you, actually, this in the introduction. Yeah. And you kind of give an overview of the entire book as we go through. So how many different lectures were there that are captured here? And did people, so did someone write a paper and then read the paper, or did they write a talk and this is their version of the talk?
So here's what we did. We pulled together a small group of women, just a select group of women, 40 women, and it was a closed door event. Mm-hmm. So we were all on the same page in terms of supporting the church's teaching, but we wanted to really dig into some issues of, okay, how does this work with feminism? How do we translate the church's teachings to the average woman? What about women in certain positions? What about women working? All these questions. So we had a really frank discussion. And then the idea was that the women who were presenting the papers, they were able to go back and incorporate some of these ideas and come up with even stronger papers, which we then sent over to the Vatican. And I think in that sense we're really helping to inform mm-hmm. people over there who are working on these issues. But then we published it as a book with some edits. Mm-hmm. So hopefully it's interesting to the average lay reader.
Now, were all the talks in the book, or only some picked out to be in the book?
All of them.
All of them. Okay, so this is representative of the entire thing. Okay. Right. In chapter 1, even our feminism must be service. Mm-hmm. It's Helen Alvarez writes, mm-hmm. and argues that the church's successful integration of women into the Catholic project of the world will not only make God more visible in the world, but also offer a revolutionary model for the world to follow. How does one go about, when you write in this book, as she talks about that idea of successful integration of women into the Catholic project in the world, how does that work? What do you mean when you say that? Because people mean different things when they hear that.
I think it means a number of different things. I think one of the things Pope Francis is doing over in the Vatican is he is trying to pull more women into key positions. So you have the number of women on the International Theological Commission went from 2 to 5. And again, it's not a numbers game, but he picked some great women, really solid women. And so in grappling with different areas of theology, they're going to bring insights that are different from the male theologian, not unorthodox or not against the church's teaching, but they'll see something different. And that is the idea of complementarity. You see things, I see things, and together we see the whole. And it creates something even better. And so in terms of what Helen's referring to, she's not talking about every diocese has to have a woman in this position. It means looking at a situation and saying, all right, let's see what women think. Let's see what men think. Let's come up with something better here. And to make sure we're consulting and listening to people who have something to say.
Okay, in chapter 2, Sister Sarah Butler, fairly well known, some thoughts on the theology of woman in the church, and of course she was well known for her defense of the church's teaching on the male priesthood. You go on to say she stresses the importance of building on recent papal teaching on women, as you were saying, the wisdom of promoting a theology of man. I thought this was interesting, along with a theology of woman, the need to recognize the effects of sin on the history of male-female relationships, the perils of confusing the notions of equality and vocation. What does she mean, that notion of equality and vocation?
Well, because some women will look and they'll say, what are men doing? In order to be holy, in order to be equal, we have to do what they're doing. And so the point she's making is no, you have a vocation, I have a vocation. We're supposed to just figure out what is it that God wants of us. And we're all called to holiness. And that's where she talks about the lay vocation is a call to holiness. And that is the ultimate participation in the church and in living the faith. It's not in being able to give a homily or celebrate Mass. That's a particular call, a particular vocation, and that's not ours.
Now, this was someone I was, Professor Elizabeth Schlitz, J.D. Schultz, okay. Not Schlitz like the beer.
Not
Schultz,
like the beer.
Schultz, okay, no wonder I got it wrong. The promise and the threat of 3 in integral complementarity. Now, that sounds very complicated to me. Professor Schultz argues that women's voices and the creative dynamism of men and women working together are often absent within church structures and the church's work. She highlights barriers such as fear and distrust. So men and women aren't working together, or inside the clerical structures because women are as representative, there's not that dialogue that we're looking for?
Again, talking at a certain level, because I think women are well represented, in fact probably overly represented in service. Well, women are the hands of the church, really. They're doing great work there. But what she's talking about is women do need to be brought into discussions about different things. How do you help families that have fallen apart? That's something women have a lot of insight to bring to. And so this idea of integral complementarity comes from Sister Prudence Allen, who is one of the new appointees on the International Theological Commission. And her point is this: women plus men aren't just women plus men. It's you create something more. So it's 1 + 1 = 3. When we get the two of us collaborating, we do something better than you could do on your own and I could do on my own.
So we're getting a synthesis in some ways.
And it's better.
In a sense, it's the same idea of a child. I mean, there's creativity, there's something else is new that comes out of that relationship that wasn't there before, and it didn't exist before the two come together.
And there are a lot of theological parallels to that.
Okay, now there's what, 3 parts to the book? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
3 or 4? Because part 2 is theological considerations towards a richer understanding of complementarity. 2 Women and the Lord, the prophetic voice of women in the church by Sister Mary Magdalene Todd. And she talks about Mary Magdalene, right, and St. Catherine of Siena.
And what her point there is that women often have a prophetic voice. Women are often calling the church to look in a particular direction, to pay attention to specific things.
And why do you think women have that capability?
I think that's part of the feminine genius that Pope John Paul II talked about. Because we have an aptitude for motherhood, we're oriented towards the other, and we see things as a whole, and we're sensitive to what's going on in people's lives. Not that men aren't, but I think we naturally go there.
I think it's fair to say, I think women, as a general rule, tend to be more than men tend to be. We tend to be focused on how do I fix this problem and move on.
How do I get this done? And so Sister Mary Magdalene's point there is that because of that gift, women do have a prophetic role. Because we can see certain things, we need to call that out, and we need to call the church back to that focus, that primacy of the person and loving the person. And so that's something we do. So you carry that through all the things that the church does.
Mm-hmm. Also, I noticed in chapter 5, it talks about the idea of the Marian dimension, because that comes up repeatedly here. Mm-hmm. But sometimes that's used against women such as yourselves, because they say, well, you know, that Mary was a doormat. I mean, I hate to say it that way. That's you know, she just kind of went along. She was there in the group, and you know what I mean, which is totally wrong. But it seems to be this, and even like you said, well, women are into service, and let's keep them there serving. And if we're not going to be in service, well, then the only way we're going to get out of service is to be in charge.
Yeah, but see, that's a false dichotomy. You think about Mary, she was the one who gave us Jesus, right? Because she said yes. She was the one who kept the faith when the apostles were weak or were unsure. She was the one who gave them strength. And so I heard a great homily actually by Bishop Laurie. I was in Lawrence in the past couple of weeks, and he gave a homily over there, and he was talking about Mary visiting Elizabeth. And he said, this is the Marian church. It's Mary saying, here's my son. Love my son, accept my son, you know, accept his embrace, all that he's giving you. That's what Mary does. And that's what we're called to do, and that's what women are called to do in a very particular way. It's not about being in charge. It's not about power.
Now, in chapter 7, the dignity and vocation of men, why masculinity and fatherhood matter to women, and this is somebody you know, Teresa Farnham, highlights the importance to women, the church society, of illuminating fatherhood and its relationship to the dignity of women and motherhood. It does seem to be at the point in time that it seems like as if we have all these freedoms and license and liberties, that, you know, motherhood has been kind of cast down, but at the same time, so has fatherhood.
So has fatherhood, right.
You know, it's really just people become a donor, so to speak, and then move on. And
I think that's an unfortunate casualty of feminism. And one of the things that Deb Savage, Professor Deb Savage, does is she talks about not just the feminine genius, but the masculine genius. Let's figure out and define and talk about and understand and value what it is that men bring. And so in my sister Teresa's chapter, where she's talking about motherhood and fatherhood, the whole point is complementarity. It's in relationship of men and women, of men to women, in, you know, relationship to each other, that will fully understand and become who we're supposed to be. So we understand ourselves in relation to the other, you know, which is the Trinity is a relationship, right? Why should we be surprised that that's the case? So if you're valuing women and you're looking at complementarity, complementarity is not just about women. It's about women in relationship to men. It's about that collaboration. And so men have kind of dropped off the map, really. Right. Masculinity and the strong male is a really threatened figure, I think, in our culture. So when we talk about complementarity, it's not just women, it's really valuing men for who they are and saying, all right, how do we work together to create something better? Almost
in this kind of, what we've seen recently, this kind of gender neutral approach to things where everything's supposed to be
because they're rejecting motherhood and fatherhood is really what it comes down to.
Now in chapter 8 with motherly care, it's Catherine Ruth Pakuluk. She says, women have a special role in restoring a correct understanding of education. I thought this was interesting, including the value of Catholic education and the need to educate children for their vocations. So where does education fall into this? Is this just an outreach of a mother taking care of her children, and how does that have to do with Catholic education?
Yeah, it is connected to that, because women are continually, from the time we first look at our children, we're looking at them and trying to shape them, form them, bring out the best in them. And that's what education is about. And Catholic education is something distinct. It says, we're not educating you just in terms of math or history or physics. We're looking at what you're called to do in life. Education for vocation. And so she's saying, because women have a particular sensitivity to the person and to helping our children flourish, we have a lot to say and a lot to offer about what Catholic education might look like. And if I can say, that's one area that I think the church is really going to have to double down and really do better, especially in light of this gender neutral culture. Boys aren't going to know who they are, girls aren't going to know who they are. The church knows who men and women are. We need to be able to bring that out.
Well, the trouble, too, is as we play fast and loose with this, our society is going to disintegrate.
Right.
I mean, we've seen that through history. That
Right. Oh, yeah.
you can't play fast and loose with these kinds of things. And education is important. In Chapter 9, scholar Erica
Oh, Bacciacci.
Biachiachi. I'll let you take that one. Rather than I fumbled through it. I thought this was good too, and it urges us to accompany all women, particularly the poor and the vulnerable. We hear about that all the time. But this is the point. Straying from church teaching on contraception, abortion, sex, and marriage has harmed all women, but has harmed poor women the most. And I think that's an important point that gets missed. In fact, it seems to get spun the other way, that liberating ones from all this is especially good for those poor, oppressed people on the bottom. But it hasn't worked out that way.
No, it's exactly true that the poorer you are, the more vulnerable you are, the single women, they're bearing the brunt of the sexual revolution. But here's the thing, Doug, it's women who are most well-suited to speak to that point. Why? Because we're women. And so we can say, hey, guess what? All this stuff that feminism was supposed to bring us, I mean, there were some good things, but but the rest of this stuff is really hurting women. And so we women can say that in a way that's convincing and compelling.
And it seems to some degree that the second generation, or maybe it's the third generation at this point, of women seem to have realized that it didn't quite work out as well maybe for their mothers as the mothers thought it was going to work out. And so it seems like there's something out there about that, some concerns, which is why also I think the point making here in Chapter 10 about leaning in, the idea is that the Catholic vision of women and family work could change the conversation about women's work inside and outside the home, because the church does have to be, and we all have to be more understanding of the relationships with, if we want to espouse women having families and families raising families, then we have to have a culture that's supportive of the family.
Right, and it makes that possible. So when you have women working for the church ought to be the best employer in terms of being flexible, in terms of allowing part-time work, in terms of saying to the woman, okay, we value what you bring. What can you give right now? Maybe this is a time when you're most intensively mothering, so you're not going to be working as much, or you take time off. But then do we have a way to incorporate her back in? Do we have a way to support her?
Is there a bridge there that maybe working at home,
and
you know, certainly telecommuting is not very difficult these days.
Days.
And so much of what we do is intellectual in a sense of information and moving stuff around. A lot of things can be done remotely. Chapter 11, Offense, Defense, and the Catholic Woman thing. Now, was this written by Lou Holtz at Notre Dame? Okay. This is Mary Eberstadt's often witty and always insightful take on women's ability to shape the culture for the better. What do you think there's a place and why it's important for sometimes these kinds of things to be presented in a witty kind of way, a la Chesterton, let's say?
Right. A kind of winsome tone, making things attractive. I think that is important, especially with millennials who have short attention spans, or seem to have short attention spans.
I think it's getting shorter as we speak.
But people are learning things differently, and so to the extent that we can make the truth attractive, and we can use humor, use wit, I think that's all the better. So.
Now, do you think a book like this that you put together, and you edited it, and et cetera. Now, this is an accessible book. It's not the kind of thing you need to have a PhD or be involved with some MA course in future advancement of mission and orientation at the local seminary as a woman. This is something anybody, and certainly I think it's good for men to read too, I certainly think.
I would suggest that.
But for anybody who's watching an EWTN who wants to understand better, you know, some of the dynamics that they hear about in the church, and again, a better understanding of what it is to be truly feminine, I guess, as Dr. von Hildebrand might say.
And one good thing about this is I encourage women to just dive in wherever it most interests them.
Yeah, you don't have to read from the beginning.
You don't have to read. Each chapter works on its own, and there's so much there. There's so much richness. It's really thought-provoking and enjoyable.
Right, and so what would you say is your next opportunity? Now, have you written other books on your own?
A long time ago, I wrote Catholic Education, Homeward Bound with Kimberly Hahn.
Oh, I remember that book, right. No, I never got to talk to you about that book. I remember that book, right.
So I did that, and then actually we have a couple of more books in the works, because this is the first, this came out of our first symposium. Our second one focused on family, and our third one, which we just finished.
So you think there'll be a compendium of each one of those particular conferences?
The third one is gender theory.
Okay, so make sure you stop by the next time you put something out. It's great to talk to you. Thank you so much.
you too.
Speaking with Mary Rice Hasson, editor of Promise and Challenge, published by OSV. Catholic Women Reflect on Feminism, Complementarity, and the Church. It's an excellent book available through the EWTN Religious Catalog. Check it out. Check us out next time right here on EWTN's Bookmark.